There are people who have lived an entire life and still feel like they are waiting for it to begin. They have worked. They have provided. They have shown up, day after day, year after year. And yet, somewhere along the way, something was lost. Not stolen, not taken by force. Simply left behind, like a coat forgotten on a chair in a restaurant you will never visit again. If you are watching this right now, something in you already knows what that coat was. This video is not about regret as a wound. It is about regret as a teacher, perhaps the most honest teacher most of us will ever have. For generations, we were taught that a life well lived was measured in accomplishments, in titles earned, in money saved, in problems solved without ever once showing that solving them hurt you. We were taught that growing older meant growing tougher. That wisdom arrived like armor, hardening you against the world, sealing you off from pain. But today, we understand something deeper. The myth is this, that strength means needing nothing and no one. The truth is this, the people who have lived the most fully are not the ones who needed the least. They are the ones who learned, sometimes far too late, to need the right things. Presence, honesty, connection, rest. Moments that were allowed to simply be moments without being rushed toward the next obligation. Growing older is not the accumulation of walls. It is, when done with courage, the slow, quiet removal of them. In this video, we will explore 8 things I wish I had stopped doing at 25. 8 habits, patterns, and quiet mistakes that so many of us carry without ever realizing the weight of them, until the weight becomes the whole story of our lives. We will count down from 8 to 1. I ask you to stay until number 1. Because number 1 is the truth that most people sense their entire lives but never once say out loud, not to a friend, not to a partner, not even to themselves, in the dark of a sleepless night. Some of these will feel like gentle reminders. Others may feel like someone has reached through the screen and placed a hand on the exact place that has been quietly hurting for years. Either way, you are not alone in this. Let us begin. Picture a man in his late 50s sitting at a family dinner. His children are laughing. His grandchildren are running between the chairs. And yet, somewhere in the back of his mind, he is still replaying a conversation from 30 years ago. A dismissive comment made by a father who rarely said anything kind, or a colleague who once questioned his ability in front of others. He never stopped trying to prove something to people who have long since moved on with their own lives, or, in some cases, people who are no longer even alive to receive the proof. This is one of the most quietly exhausting patterns a human being can carry. Psychologists call it external validation dependency, the deep, almost involuntary need to have your worth confirmed by someone outside yourself. It often begins in childhood, when love felt conditional. When praise was rare and criticism was loud, the child learns, I must earn my right to exist here. And then, tragically, the adult forgets to unlearn it. The wisdom that age brings, slowly and sometimes painfully, is this. The people whose approval we spent decades chasing were often just as afraid, just as uncertain, just as lost as we were. They were not judges. They were fellow travelers, and most of them were barely watching. Stop performing for an audience that was never really there. Your life was always your own. Think of a man who, for 40 years, wore exhaustion like a badge of honor. He was always the first one in the office, always the last one to leave the party. Not because he was enjoying himself, but because leaving early felt like surrender. He confused stillness with laziness. He confused silence with failure. He filled every quiet moment with noise, because quiet, for him, had always felt dangerous. And then one day, his body simply stopped asking permission. A health scare. A collapse. A morning when he could not get out of bed and, for the first time in decades, had to simply lie there. With himself. With the silence he had been running from. What he found there surprised him. It was not emptiness. It was not failure. It was underneath all the noise he had manufactured, a person. A real tired, tender person who had needed rest for a very long time. Modern psychology is increasingly clear on this. Chronic overwork is not a sign of discipline. It is often a sign of avoidance. We stay busy to avoid sitting with feelings that have no easy solutions. We stay productive to avoid the terrifying freedom of simply being, without achieving. Rest is not the enemy of a meaningful life. Rest is part of a meaningful life. The tree does not apologize for winter. Learn to put down what you are carrying, even briefly. The world will not collapse, and you might finally hear yourself think. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being surrounded by obligations you never truly chose, commitments made out of guilt, favors given out of fear of being disliked, paths followed because someone else pointed at them and you are too uncertain of yourself to look in a different direction. Imagine a woman in her mid-60s, looking back at a career she spent 30 years building, a career that was respectable, stable, well-regarded, and realizing that she chose it primarily because it was what her family expected, not because it lit something inside her, not because it made her feel alive, because it made other people comfortable. She said yes when she meant no, over and over again, across decades, and each small yes to someone else was, in its quiet way, a small no to herself. Boundaries are not walls built to keep people out. They are the honest expression of who you are and what you can truly give without hollowing yourself out in the process. Saying no, said with kindness, said with clarity, is not rejection. It is self-respect made audible. The tragedy is not that we gave to others. The tragedy is that we gave so completely that we forgot to leave anything for the life we had actually hoped to live. If I were 25 again, I would practice the profound, underrated dignity of an honest no, not unkindly, but clearly. And without the weeks of guilt that followed. There are words that were never spoken. You know the ones. The apology that sat at the edge of your tongue for years and never crossed it. The expression of love for a parent, offered too formally, too rarely, and eventually not at all, because suddenly there was no more time. The honest conversation with a friend whose company you quietly missed for a decade before finally admitting to yourself, alone, far too late, that the falling out had been partly your fault. Postponement feels safe in the moment. The conversation can wait until tomorrow, until things are less tense, until you find the right words, until the moment feels right. And then the moment that felt right never comes, and eventually, the person it was meant for is no longer there to receive it. Psychologists who study end-of-life reflections, the thoughts and feelings of people in the final chapter of their lives, report this with striking consistency. The deepest regrets are almost never about things people did. They are about things people did not do. Words not spoken, presence not offered, love expressed only in private, never aloud, where it might actually have reached someone. The right moment is almost never the perfect moment. It is usually just the next available one. If someone deserves to hear something from you, consider that today might be the only day you are certain you have. And love a man sits in a chair by a window. It is Sunday. His son called last week, the first call in several months, and the conversation was polite but careful, the way conversations become when two people have never learned to be honest with each other. There was a disagreement years ago, something said in anger. Neither of them apologized. Both of them wanted to. Neither of them did because somehow the apology came to feel like losing. And so the silence stretched. A week became a month became a year became a habit. Pride is perhaps the most sophisticated of all human defenses. It disguises itself as dignity. It tells you that you are protecting something important. Your self-respect, your principles, your version of what happened. And sometimes it is right. There are things worth standing firm on, but pride very often protects nothing except the distance between you and the people you love. It wins the argument and loses the relationship. It holds the line and watches. From behind that line is everything worth protecting quietly moves away. The courage it takes to say I was wrong to a parent, a child, a friend, a partner is not the courage of weakness. It is the courage of someone who has decided that the relationship matters more than the record. That being close is more valuable than being right. Love is not diminished by humility. It is completed by it. Long before social media made this a daily ritual, human beings were already experts at it, looking at the neighbor's house and seeing only its freshly painted exterior, looking at a colleague's confident presentation, and never once imagining the sleepless night before it, looking at a friend's seemingly effortless marriage and not knowing, could not know, the silent agreements and quiet compromises that held it together behind closed doors. Comparison is the art of measuring your full, complicated interior life against the carefully curated surface of someone else's. And it is a measurement that will never, under any circumstances, be fair to you. At 25, so many of us believed that other people had something we lacked, a clarity of purpose, a confidence that did not need to be rebuilt every morning, a certainty about where they were headed and why. And we looked at our own uncertainty and decided it was evidence of inadequacy. What we did not understand, what only time teaches, slowly and without apology, is that almost everyone was doing the same thing. Almost everyone was performing composure while quietly drowning in uncertainty. The confident ones were afraid. The certain ones were guessing. The people whose lives looked whole from the outside were, from the inside, making it up as they went, exactly like the rest of us. You were never as far behind as you believed, and neither was anyone else as far ahead as they appeared. Particular kind of person, and perhaps you recognize yourself in this, who has spent their entire life preparing to be happy, who is said in various forms, throughout various decades, when the children are grown, when the mortgage is paid, when I retire, when things settle down, then I will be present. Then I will enjoy this. Then I will finally live. And one morning, they wake up. The children are grown. The mortgage is paid. Their career is finished. Things have settled. And they look around at the life they built while waiting to live it. And they realize, with a strange, quiet grief, that the waiting was the life. The ordinary Tuesdays were the life. The imperfect dinners were the life. The unremarkable evenings that felt like interruptions to something more important were, in fact, the thing itself. The present moment is not a waiting room. It is the room, the only room any of us ever truly occupies. This is not a call to abandon planning or ignore the future. It is a recognition that a life spent entirely in preparation is a life spent entirely in rehearsal, and the performance you were rehearsing for has been happening all along. Whether you are paying attention or not, your life is not somewhere ahead of you. It is here. It has always been here. The question is only whether you were present enough to receive it. We have reached the most painful truth, the one most people carry in silence, not the loud regrets, not the obvious mistakes that make for easy stories at the dinner table, but the quiet, lifelong concealment of the self that was most real, most tender, most honest. Picture someone, man or woman, it does not matter, who has spent their entire life being competent, capable, and composed in the presence of others, who learned very young that certain feelings were not safe to express, that vulnerability was a liability, that needing something, comfort, understanding, closeness, love, was evidence of a weakness that the world would use against them. And so they became very good at being fine. They mastered the art of the reassuring nod, the deflecting joke. The subject changed just before it reached anything real. They were loved in their way by many people, but they were never fully known by anyone, including, and perhaps most painfully, by themselves. The psychological cost of chronic self-concealment is immense. It does not disappear. It accumulates. It sits in the chest like weight. It surfaces in the 3 a.m. wakefulness, in the sudden, unexpected grief watching something small and beautiful, in the strange loneliness of being surrounded by people who know your name, but not your interior. The truth that most people discover too late is this. The parts of you that felt too raw, too uncertain, too much, those were not your weaknesses. Those were your humanity. And your humanity, offered honestly to another person, is not a burden. It is a gift. Perhaps the most profound gift one human being can offer another. You did not need to be so defended. You never did. To be seen. Truly seen. And to remain. That is what love is. And it begins with allowing yourself to be visible. If any of that felt personal, if something in these words pressed gently against something you have been carrying quietly, I want you to take a breath. A real one. Slow and full. There is nothing weak about reflection. There is nothing small about sitting with the truth of your own life and looking at it honestly. In fact, it takes a kind of courage that our culture rarely names and almost never celebrates, the courage to be honest with yourself when no one is watching, the courage to feel something without immediately resolving it. You have lived, perhaps imperfectly, perhaps with regrets you could not have avoided, and some you could. But you are here. You are still capable of reflection, which means you are still capable of change. Not the dramatic overnight kind that makes for inspiring stories, but the quiet, daily kind that makes for a meaningful life. You are doing your best with what you knew. Most people are. Most people always have been. Be patient with your past self, and be honest with the one you are still becoming. Aging is not what we were told it was. It is not the slow subtraction of everything that mattered. It is not the long defeat. It is not the irreversible slide toward irrelevance. Aging, when met with honesty, is refinement. It is the long, patient process of learning what was always true about you, what you needed, what you valued, what you would have done differently, and what, even now, you can still choose to do better. The lines on your face are not evidence of erosion. They are the record of a person who stayed, who showed up, who felt things deeply enough to let them leave a mark. Every scar, every gray hair, every moment of earned exhaustion is proof not of decline, but of survival, of a life that was not merely observed from a safe distance, but actually lived. Silence, as you grow older, is not emptiness. It is depth. The person who has lived fully does not need to fill every silence. They have learned to sit inside it and find that it is not empty at all. You are not at the end of something. You are the most honest part of it. And the most honest part is always quietly, stubbornly, the most beautiful. I would like to ask you something, and I mean it genuinely. In the comments below this video, which of these 8 lessons landed most deeply for you? Not the one that seemed most important in the abstract, but the one that found something specific inside you. The one that described a Tuesday from 15 years ago, or a conversation that never happened, or a version of yourself you recognize but have never quite named. Share it if you are willing, not for performance, but because sometimes the most healing thing a person can do is to say, simply and without elaboration, yes, that was me. That is me. I understand this now. And if you know someone, a friend, a parent, a partner, someone quietly carrying something heavy, consider sharing this video with them, not with a message. Sometimes just the quiet offering of something that says, I thought of you, is enough. You are not alone in any of this. You never were. A gentle note before you go, this video is created for reflection, contemplation, and emotional education. It is not psychological or medical advice, and it is not a substitute for professional support. If you are navigating something heavy, grief, loss, depression, or difficult transitions, please reach out to a qualified professional who can truly walk alongside you. You deserve real support, not just a video. Take good care of yourself. That too is wisdom.